So Matt's going to be our first speaker. He's from Ventana Research. Matt's been in the industry for over 2 decades and has been an analyst for over a decade. And he's been doing a lot of coverage, particularly in our space, right? So in the emerging sort of data platform space, NoSQL, NewSQL, data lakes, data lakehouses, and the cloud based data processing space. And so please join me and welcome Matt onto the stage.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, I'm also Matt. I should say, in the interest of diversity, there are people with other names coming up. So stay tuned for that. So as Matt said, I'm going to run through quickly here 20 minutes or so talking about some of the key trends we see in the industry that are shaping the evolution and adoption of data lake. Just briefly, before I get into that, just a quick introduction to Ventana Research. So we're an industry analyst and research firm. As you can see, we've got about 100,000 members in our community. So we're quite large in terms of our scope, but actually we're a fairly small organisation, predominantly based in the US. And in fact, I'm the only person in Europe. So slightly lone existence, but everyone else is very friendly, and we always get to go over Teams and a lot of virtual sessions. Because we're, say relatively small, we're focused. So the core areas of focus include analytics, data, digital business, digital technology. As you can see, some of the key application areas as well that obviously rely on those underlying data and analytics platforms, things like customer experience, human capital management, Office of Finance. And I'm part of the team that covers data analytics and digital technology, and in particular, responsible for our coverage of data. So I thought, to set the scene, some of the key sort of overall business trends that we see driving adoption of technologies in the data space at the moment. So one of those we see is the consumerization of IT and the drive towards real-time responsiveness. Obviously, we see this in consumer applications, which is now driving part of what's driving requirements for more responsive enterprise applications. And increasingly, as I say, my colleagues who cover those application areas are writing about and in doing research around the use of things like personalization, recommendations, obviously all of which needs to be driven by data and analytics. We see, obviously, data has always been important, clearly, to organizations. But the number of roles, the number of participants within an organization that need access to data as part of their day-to-day working lives is increasing, and therefore organizations are having to evolve the way in which they manage and deliver data across the organization, increase engagement of business users through self-service, with access to data that obviously is pertinent to their roles and their responsibilities, obviously with all the security and privacy and governance aspects that go along with that. And then we see the increasingly sophisticated use of data in operations. As I say, data informs all parts of a business today, not just sort of the business analyst team, the data analyst team, the data science team, but all parts of an organization. And we see, obviously a lot of people talk about this concept of being more data-driven and data-driven organizations. And I think we all kind of know a data-driven organization when we see one. We think of companies like Spotify or Netflix or maybe ING Bank. But it's kind of difficult, I think, for organizations that are trying to become more data-driven to identify what it is they can look at and what they can attempt to achieve. So I've sort of drawn a plan here, at least what we mean when we talk about organizations being more data-driven. And part of that is more of a data culture within the organization. And that needs to come from the top down. It's achieved through a combination of people and process and information technology, but driven by leadership to encourage people within the organization, be they executives, business leaders, any kind of level of decision makers, to define and articulate the value of data to that organization and the vision of how data can be used in that organization. In order to do that, we also have seen over the years an increased investment in data literacy, so ensuring that people within the organization, whatever their level, whatever their role, have access to data that's pertinent to that role, but also have the skills to actually work with data and understand, how data is part of their role. So that requires obviously the delivery of training and an investment in skills. And increasingly we see that as being delivered not just through obviously training everyone to be a data scientist or data analyst, but actually look at how data is relevant to someone in their particular role, the applications they use, the business processes, the workflows that they have, and ensuring the data is delivered to them using the applications they already use in order to make decisions. And obviously we see things like natural language processing and embedded analytics driving self-service access to data. We also see, and related to that, but this idea of sort of data democratization, which we talk about removing barriers that prevent or delay access to data. So the people, increasingly have the skills, but then use the technology to facilitate access to data. And we see that increasingly organizations talk about then data being treated as a product that's generated perhaps by a particular business unit and made available to others, either in the same business unit, other parts of the business, or even potentially to partners and customers. And some of the key enablers of that is things like search-based data discovery, guided data navigation, as well as obviously the all-important data governance controls, which set the guardrails in place, if you like, that enable organizations to facilitate self-service. And what we say is that with those appropriate governance controls in place, that can enable sort of this concept of data curiosity. It can enable and encourage people within an organization to do more data exploration and experimentation. Obviously, data science is a key part of that, but it's not the only way we see that being delivered. Discover and explore new business opportunities, challenges, and that is obviously encouraged and reinforced through collaboration between business units, through education, which is part of their obviously driving the data culture. So obviously this is cyclical. It's not a matter of ticking each box. So that's what we talk about organizations being data driven, and clearly it's a journey and there's different aspects of that, and we can go through a whole nother presentation just on that topic alone, but I thought it was worth setting the scene. One point I think is worth dwelling on is this idea of data being treated as a product. And we see that as going hand in hand. I'm sure I know because Zhamak's talking later virtually, we will definitely be hearing about data mesh more today. And we do see that is something that is increasingly important, at least conceptually, to organizations. And we assert that more than one half of organizations are looking to adopt technologies that facilitate the delivery of data as a product within their organization. And that is not solely driven by data mesh, and we see projects that are doing that which aren't necessarily considered their data mesh, but it's part and parcel of the whole concept. The cultural and organizational changes that to data ownership that go hand in hand with data mesh facilitate data as a product and vice versa. Of course, I'm not specifically really here to talk about data mesh, although, as I say, I know we'll hear more about that today, but obviously more predominantly data lake. And it's interesting, we're now sort of 10 years into, or more than 10 years actually, into this concept of the data lake. And it evolved initially as an idea of a platform where organizations could pull data from multiple locations into a central resource and make it available for multiple people within an organization to conduct multiple initiatives and projects, predominantly analytic. And we conducted last year, actually with the support of Dremio, one of what we call our dynamic insights research projects, which is survey-based. And we found some really interesting findings from that, and I'll just run through a few of those to sort of see where we are in terms of the industry landscape today. And the key findings, as I say, was that data lakes are widely adopted, data lakes are now predominantly cloud-based, data lakes are delivering on the expectations that were laid out more than a decade ago, and data lakes are shifting to open standards. So to run through sort of each of those in turn, data lakes are widely adopted. Now, clearly this was a survey that was focused specifically on data lakes, so you would anticipate that the participants would predominantly be using data lakes. So with that pinch of salt, I think, what was clear is we saw almost 2/3 of organizations were already in production with data lakes. Almost a third are planning to adopt a data lake at some point in the future. Clearly add those together, you see that almost all the respondents in this sample are either using or planning to use data lake. Obviously, if you look at the wider population of organizations, there'll be pockets where data lake hasn't been adopted to date, but we do see it is now a significant and established part of the overall data landscape. And certainly those that have adopted data lake are increasing their use of it. As I said, data lakes are predominantly cloud-based. We see that more than 2/5 of organizations that are using cloud data lakes, more than 2/5 of organizations are using cloud data lakes as their primary data platform. And actually, we look at those that are using data lakes as their primary data platform, almost 9 in 10 are using cloud for that. Those exist on the cloud. And that's a big shift that we've seen over the last, maybe 5-6 years. And obviously the early data lake projects were based on Hadoop, which was predominantly used at that time on premises. And we've seen a really significant shift over towards cloud data lakes, over to object storage as the underlying persistence layer for data lakes, and obviously layering on top multiple different cloud services and technologies on top of that to generate value from that underlying data. So I said that we see that data lakes are delivering on their expectations, and to put that into context, I think if we look at the original concept of the data lake, as I said, it was about multiple data data from multiple data sources in a variety of formats in a single environment that could be queried by multiple business departments for a variety of analytic workloads. And we see that in terms of those first two, multiple data sources, multiple data formats, that absolutely is happening today. More than half of organizations that are using a data lake store data from more than three or more different operational data sources. We also see that 59% of organizations are storing data using 2 or more file formats, and more than a quarter are using 3 or more. And as you can see in this particular sample, JSON was the leading file format, followed by CSV, Parquet, Awk. But the point here is that multiple data sources, multiple data formats, that is absolutely what is being delivered, and what was initially outlined as one of the key areas for data lakes to deliver something that wasn't previously available. Just a quick segue into table formats. We see that the use of new table formats is emerging. So almost half of people in this study are still using Hive tables, and we obviously anticipate that people will continue to use Hive tables for some time to come. But more than half, 57%, are using at least one of what we describe here as emerging table formats. So we mean obviously Apache Hudi, Apache Iceberg, and Delta Lake. And as it happened in this, and at the time that we did this study, 51%, just over half, were using Delta tables, just over a quarter using Apache Iceberg. Just sort of anecdotally, I think, if we would, this was about 9 months ago, I think 8-9 months ago. If we were to do this today, I think we'd see those numbers shifting a bit. We see increased interest in Iceberg, increased adoption of Iceberg, but not necessarily to the detriment of Delta tables. So, but I think the picture would be a little bit different today.
Databricks, Delta tables?
Yes, yeah. Databricks, well, obviously it is an open source project, but most associated with Databricks, absolutely. In terms of multiple departments, again, data lakes delivering on expectations. We see things like R&D, customer service, finance, product management as being areas that in particular the organizations expect to benefit or are already seeing benefits from their data lake deployments. But actually 9 in 10, almost 9 in 10, expect multiple business departments and functions to benefit from their investment in data lake. And then finally, multiple workloads. we see more than 2/3 are actually running 2 or more analytics workloads on those data lake environments. Obviously, business intelligence reports was the most dominant there, popular, also 69%, but also data science, machine learning, interactive business intelligence, dashboards, ad hoc exploration. And then interestingly, more than a third actually running operational applications on their data lake. And that's something we've seen an increasing amount of, particularly as we see an investment in sort of interactive, intelligent operational applications, which have as part of them things like recommendations and personalization. Obviously, that requires an analytic process, even if the application itself is operational. So obviously, data lake, if that's where the data is, clearly is increasingly being used for those kind of applications as well. And then the final, I think, data point from this survey was that data lakes are shifting to open standards. And what was really interesting, in this study, and this really jumped out at us, is that that perhaps that first phase of data lakes, as I said, a lot of data lakes built on Hadoop, using sort of custom scripts and code, and organizations sort of getting multiple projects working together with a lot of hard work and perhaps a bit of duct tape. We do see that decreasing. So 23% of organizations today describe their current data lake architecture as being based on homegrown scripts and code. We asked them what they plan, for their architecture to be for the data lake in the future, and that goes down to 9%. And as you can see, the growth is in the adoption of proprietary tools and cloud services, going from 36 to 47%, and particularly open standards and open formats, going from 21% to 39%. Interestingly, what isn't shown in this chart was that actually almost 2/5 of those currently using proprietary tools and cloud services are planning to move towards open standards. So a lot of the growth in proprietary tools and cloud services is coming from people currently with homegrown scripts and code, or indeed they don't have a data lake. And I think we see that if an organization doesn't have a data lake today, it's very easy to jump into a proprietary offering or a cloud service offering that is pre-built for them. But actually amongst, as I said, 2/5 of those currently using proprietary actually are moving towards open standards and open formats. So a real validation of the importance of open standards and open formats, even if it's not immediately obvious when you look at the chart. And one of it's not necessarily a reason for that, because we didn't actually drill into asking why that was, but I thought this was really interesting. It's certainly a correlation. We look at there's a much higher satisfaction level from organizations that are using today open standards and open formats with their data lake. So overall, about more than 4/5 of organizations say they're at least somewhat satisfied with their data lake. Actually, almost half of those using open standards and open formats are truly satisfied with their data lake, and that compares to only 28% of those using proprietary tools and cloud services. So there's lots more to drill into there, and that will be part of our ongoing research. But definitely a really interesting correlated data point, which kind of highlights perhaps why we certainly don't see people shifting away from open standards and open formats if that's what their architecture is today. I actually have got through all of this without using the term data lakehouse, which wasn't deliberate, but I suppose it was to some extent, because I wanted to talk about the overall trends without going into specifically talking about lakehouse. But we do see this overall trends and this shift towards open standards formats, and the adoption of newer technologies that enable organizations to generate greater value from their investment in the initial data lake architecture is being driven, in part by adoption of data lakehouse. And we certainly see that amongst organizations that already have an investment in data lake, there's going to be a real rapid shift, or there is already a rapid shift towards adoption of technologies that we would, think of as turning that into a data lakehouse environment. And we can go into talk about that, I know, in the next session. But it's definitely about, generating greater value from that accumulated data. I'd say the first phase of data lake as I said, delivered on expectations in terms of having a repository of data from multiple sources that could be accessed by multiple business units for multiple purposes. The lakehouse is about making that much more efficient and delivering additional capabilities that deliver additional business value from that data. So just to finish off, we always like to finish off with a recommendation. There's a couple of things here. Obviously, of organisations that have not already done so, we definitely would recommend that they start experimenting investment in data lake and data lakehouse architecture to improve the insight from their accumulated data across the organisation. I think organisations that have already perhaps done that first phase of data lake adoption should explore the benefits of lakehouse functionality to improve and accelerate the value generated from that environment. Well, I think it's important to obviously evaluate data lake and data lakehouse in the context of wider business initiatives. Business transformation, digital transformation initiatives. We talk about data culture. Obviously, as I said, it's not just about the technology; it's about the people and the process, and the information. And it's those wider initiatives that can drive through not just the adoption of data lake and data lakehouse, but proving the value of those, in the long term. And then lastly, just be cognizant of the potential benefits of open standards and open formats. Obviously, there's multiple different data lakehouse technologies and platforms and options available to organizations, but we do absolutely see that there are some real benefits from open standards, open formats, and particularly in relation to both proprietary tools in terms of things like avoiding obviously vendor lock-in and having a flexibility to move from either from on-premises to cloud or between cloud providers, although clearly that's not something we see organizations doing on a regular basis, but to have the option to do so is important. And then compared to homegrown scripts and code, again, it's really about the efficiency and particularly it's removing some of the management complexity and the overheads associated with that. So with that, I'll thank you very much for your time. If you'd like to learn more about what we do and some of our research, then you can follow up with some of the links here. Obviously, I know you can't click on these, but I'm sure we'll be sending the slides out. And then, we're always happy to hear from get feedback and hear from organisations. So yeah, thank you very much for your time, and I think we'll move on. You're going to introduce the panel. So yeah, thanks very much.